Where the weird things grow. I just want to say, given that my SteelCon finished with riding a hobby horse while being chased by Scott with a coconut, making horse noises, there's some competition. So why am I talking twice? Yesterday was Mark the enthusiastic amateur. I was building robots despite no experience or professional qualification in doing that thing. Today is Mark as a reluctant professional. I'm wearing a shirt and everything. And I'm talking about application security, and my notes aren't displaying for some reason, even though I told it to do that. Never mind, we'll wing it. So I want to start out by telling two stories. There's a reason for this. The first story is part of the story of how I got into information security. I got into security by complete accident. I was looking after some people's web servers as part of some consultancy work I was doing. One of them got broken into, and I ended up ringing a bank who were the receivers of some of the malicious traffic that was going via a compromised machine, and said, "Did you know this was happening?" And they said, "No, do you want a job?" And on hearing that they had jobs available in application security, I spent a couple of months learning everything I could about it. And it was a really difficult experience for me because I'd worked as a software engineer for all of my professional life up to that point. I had built a lot of systems that, frankly, I was quite proud of. You know, obviously they were brilliant, right? And one by one, I lost respect for the things that I'd done as I realized that every one of them had a different sort of set of security vulnerabilities in them. You know, I think all of us had a moment when we were learning about security where we got that sort of cold knot in the pit of our stomach once a penny dropped and we realized that not everything was the way that it seemed before. Now, that was a long time ago. I know I don't look old enough. Getting on for 20 odd years. Anyway, so I ended up getting a job at this bank. It was my first full-time job in InfoSec. Who remembers Egg? Yeah, it was Egg. At the time, they were the world's largest internet bank. And it was a fun challenge for lots of different reasons. We used to get loads of phishing when phishing wasn't really a thing. We had to build a lot of technologies to provide countermeasures for that sort of thing before the industry had really caught up. So it was really, really useful for me in lots of ways. But I remember on my first day, the first bit of work that I was given, there's a chap there called Garant, and I'd been given the corporate issue laptop, and I had no tools. And he said, "Oh, we've got this thing, I'd like you to take a look at it." And it was a Visual Basic application that talked to a database. And I had no tools. But I had WordPad, and I'm thinking, what can I do? So I had a look at the Visual Basic application, and I thought, I wonder if I can open that in WordPad. And I could, and I scrolled down, and I saw what looked like UCS2 encoded SQL strings in the binary. And I thought, so I made some changes, and that's how I hacked a bank using WordPad. But my point there is that, first of all, there's a realization. There's that cold knot in the pit of your stomach when you realize that the world isn't the place you thought it was. And the second is that there's this sort of massive enthusiasm for a technical thing that gets you into AppSec in the first place, right? AppSec is what people who would otherwise be pen testers would do if they want reasonable hours and not have to write reports all the time, right? Anyway, as I said, that was a long time ago. And this talk really is about what I've learned since then. Because I've spent most of my time since then working for 3 different companies, one of which was that bank, and the company it subsequently got bought by. I then spent most of 10 years working at Mozilla, where I did security engineering and security assurance on Firefox. And I now work for Matillion, where I look after AppSec there. And by chance, all 3 of those places I joined at or around the time that software security first started being a separate thing considered within that organization. And it means that I've had a perspective on how that works in different environments. So I wanted to share that. And the first lesson is this. I excitedly on my first day attacked the task that Garant had given me, thinking that I was going to be a good technical job. But what I've learned since is that security is mostly cultural. That's the first thing that I wanted to talk about. So let's say you're entering a new organization. They've got no AppSec program. What's the first thing that you're going to do? Chickens. People would be disappointed if there weren't chickens. The first thing to do is to be curious. Okay. This is important for a bunch of reasons. It's important because you need to know how the company that you're joining ticks. What makes the company work? What is the thing that they do? What's their product? Is the software which you're dealing with the security for actually one of the company's products, or is it enabling something that they do? What is the relationship between that software and the company's business model? Because, it's very, very different for a company like a bank where software enables the business than it is for a company where the product is software. You need to work out how the company is structured. What are the different teams? What are the different departments? How do they work together? And this is really important because it tells you a lot about the power dynamics within the company. It tells you a lot about where the levers are that you'll need to pull to get influence within that organization. And also it tells you the parameters within which your day-to-day work is going to operate. So, for example, software security is a very different game if you're just doing software security assurance than if you also have engineering responsibilities where you need to build part of the security machinery that the company uses. So the first question is, do you have a security engineering department, or am I responsible for bits of that as well? If I'm responsible for bits of that as well, am I part of engineering or am I separate from engineering? And that's really useful because you need to know whether you've got actual control over something or whether you're going to need to exercise soft power when you're doing things. But there's another really, really important reason why being curious is one of the first things that you need to do. And that is because it's all about the people, right? It's all about the people. And if when you join an organization, you sort of sit down behind your desk and you do the thing that you're doing, and you spend no time going out and finding out about other people, you're never going to get anywhere. I learned something from someone that I work with recently. I work with a guy called Aaron. If you're watching, hi. If you're not, don't worry. He's a really nice guy. But I noticed a thing, which is that whenever we go out for lunch or something when we're working together, he'll always have a conversation with the person that serves him. It's not just transactional, handing over the money and perhaps saying thank you if he's bought something. He'll always say, how are you? How's your day going? There's always a little bit of small talk. And the effect it has on people is incredible. What started out as a transactional interaction actually turns into something that's a lot more pleasant for everybody. And here's the really weird thing. Neither of us actually work in the office. We're fully remote, but occasionally we'll catch up in Altrincham and we'll go out for lunch. And the people that served him before remember him again, and they'll say, oh, hello, how's it going? And immediately the relationship is improved. And it's the same in the workplace, right? And so if you've gone out and you've taken the time to understand what people are doing and why and how the company works, well, do you know what? You've just put a face on your department. You've told people who you are as well as finding out who they are and what they do. And that's really, really important. Now, remember the cold knot in the pit of the stomach story? There's a learning moment there, right? And what you do when you join an organization and start their security journey kind of mirrors that in a way, because you're giving them lots of moments where maybe they're not feeling very comfortable. And there's a bit of empathy here as well, because as someone who thought they were a pretty good developer, I had stuff that I could learn. And the people that you're working with are in the same place as you were. Now, I find it quite useful to think in terms of perspectives here, because nobody who you're working with in application security wants to build insecure software. And so I think it's helpful to think about why it was that I needed that realization, the sort of horror of having that realization. Now, when you're using a computer system, you've got a goal in mind. If you're a software engineer, you're thinking about how the system that you're building is going to work. Perhaps you've got a ticket and you're trying to work out how you can organize the code, restructure things to make the software do this new thing. If you're working in quality assurance, you're looking at the spec and trying to find out ways in which the code might not do that thing. If you're a user, you're probably not actually thinking about the software at all. It's just a means for doing something. You're trying to log into your bank or put a picture of a chicken on a slide or something. And as security people, we have a different perspective, right? And one of the most important things we can do is teach people how to see the world from our point of view. And my first question for you really is to think about how reasonable it is for us to do that if we're not going to take the time to do the reverse, to understand what it is that they want to do. So there you go, that's the first thing, be curious. Second one, this is much shorter. Find a direction. That's from Alice in Wonderland, you may recognise it. Not every organisation will have the same direction when it comes to software security. If you are a bank and the software serves a business purpose, then your needs are going to be very different from if you're Mozilla and you want to ship Firefox or something. But also, depending on the type of organisation and the security environment it lives in, then your requirements are going to be very different. So what is applicable for company X is different for company Y. One size does not fit all. It's really, really important to try and figure out what's appropriate. Sounds a silly thing, but you need to work out what's appropriate for the organisation. You also need to find out what people at that organisation think is appropriate for them. It's actually really important to ask this question when you're interviewing for a role, because if the answers for those things are different, you're going to have a really bad time. How can you do this sort of thing? Well, there's things like CMMI where you can figure out what a company's appetite is for various things, what level of maturity they want. You can map that to various things like the various maturity models for software assurance and that sort of stuff. And you can get an idea of where it is you want to go. But finding a direction is a really, really important thing. You've got to be able to tell people where it is that you're going, and to do that, you've got to determine that in the first place. I had a weird moment a few weeks ago where I was looking at something on YouTube, and a video popped up that had someone I knew in it, and I've never looked for them on YouTube or anything like that. But I watched the talk, and it was a talk on leadership, a chap called Peter Anderton. He did this talk about leadership where he's got two rules, and they're really simple. The first is, it's not about you, and the second is, it's only about you. That's really clear, right? It's not about you is around the fact that when you join an organisation and you want to affect change, because that's what leaders do, it's really, really important to understand that you can't do that thing on your own. Yeah. Very often, an organisation will succeed in its own way, regardless of whether or not you're doing a thing. Your job is to help them do that quicker. And sometimes, when you're doing security in an organisation, other people do your best work, right? I don't know if that makes any sense. Sometimes other people do your best work. So going back to this idea of finding out about an organisation and figuring out what makes it tick, finding out who the people are that might be allies in a particular area is really, really useful. Looking for aligned incentives, ways to make things happen that aren't necessarily labelled security when they're being driven. Really, really useful. Give you an example. All of the big browser vendors these days are hastily finding ways of supporting safe languages in their development efforts. So Chromium are looking at including Rust within their code base, and Mozilla have been doing so in Firefox for several years now. That happened in Firefox because of a project called Stylo, where they took the style rendering engine from the Servo browser and ported it across to Firefox in, I think, Firefox 57. And it's led to massive security improvements in the browser because loads of the memory safety issues, temporal and spatial, are fixed by having a language that's guaranteed safe at compile time, right? But this wasn't a security project. The the work that was done in Stylo for Firefox 57 was actually a performance thing. They wanted a way of having concurrent rendering of a style sheet, and to do that, they needed a way of allowing concurrency. And to do that, the easiest way of doing it was to use a language that supported that stuff better. And so the biggest improvement in browser security in probably a decade actually came from a performance thing, which I think is quite interesting. So other people will do your best work for you. It's not about you. And It's Only About You is about a different thing. It's Only About You is from the observation that leadership is almost entirely in how you show up. Yeah? If you're the person that nobody wants to talk to, you're never going to get anything done. And so that's a really, really important thing to learn. It's only about you. And you know what? It's only about you applies not only to you, it also applies to the people in your function as well. Because everyone in a function like AppSec is a technical leader in their own right. Yeah? If they're talking to developers, well, they are mentoring other people in technical issues which they are experts in and other people aren't. And so a lot of the leadership tips you'll hear are important for people, even if they're not people leaders within your organization. So I think that's a useful thing as well. So yay for that random YouTube finding, and thank you, Peter Anderton. So you're going to need to measure some stuff. We all like metrics, right? First observation on measuring stuff, your problem is almost always going to be that you have too much information, not that you don't have enough. And sometimes that the noise to signal ratio is a bit too high. I think it's worth thinking about metrics in two ways. Firstly, internal stuff. You need to measure what you need to drive a feedback loop. It's all very well known where you want to go. You need to figure out whether or not you've got there yet, and measuring is a key part of that. So you've got this feedback loop driven by the stuff you collect. But then there's the stuff that you feed to other parts of the business. And again, it comes back to security being cultural, right? You're telling a story, and what you measure can help tell a story to other people in the business. So think about not only what you measure, but also how you can use that to help other people make the right choices. Know your tools. So I was talking to Andrew last night, and I said, I'm tempted to throw my talk away and just spend 30 minutes ranting about how bad AppSec tools are. And that might be a talk for another time. So if you'd like to hear that talk, if you want to hear me rant for, half an hour or more on why AppSec tools are all terrible, give me a shout. I'll do that sometime. And, there's the usual stuff you might know about. You might know about software composition analysis tooling. That'll give you comprehensive and accurate information, but not all of it's pertinent. The way I like to think about this, let's say you're using a platform like Java. Java has really dangerous things in it, like system exec, right? You know that's there. It's always there. The question for you as an AppSec engineer is, does that ever get hit? And so when an SCA tool tells you that you've got such and such a dependency and it has this vulnerability, actually that's no more informative than there is dangerous stuff in the API you're using. Sure, it's better to upgrade to the non-vulnerable version of that thing, but unless you know you're exposed to the vulnerability, the finding itself doesn't actually tell you much. This, again, is a case of you've got too much information and the noise-to-signal ratio is sort of probably quite high. You've got tools like dynamic application security tooling. Generally, the quality of this tooling isn't brilliant. The open source stuff seems to be best. I know Simon Bennett's, but that's not necessarily a plug for his stuff. How well this tooling works usually depends very much on how your application is built, and the weirder your application is, the harder time you're going to have getting good results from it. Then you've got things like static analysis tooling, that sort of stuff. And you'll get a lot of false positives from that sort of thing. And again, it's an issue with the amount of data and how much noise you've got there. But you shouldn't just think about tooling in terms of the stuff that you can buy. There's also the developer tooling. There's also the question of what platforms do people choose to use, what toolkits, what utilities have you got internally that stop people from making mistakes. And my main bit of advice on tooling is that Systemic is always way, way more effective than superficial. If you can find ways of making a change to an application or an application architecture such that it becomes really, really inconvenient for people to do the wrong thing, that's going to help you a lot more than bolting on some kind of tool to retrospectively look for a hole. So think about that sort of stuff as well. I would like to rant a lot more about tools, but I'm not going to. Verify. How do you verify your efforts within an organization? There's the internal stuff, right? You can have security things as part of your internal testing activity. So there can be automations, there can be security-specific stuff within your unit and integration test automation. Definitely a good idea. You can have internal manual testing as well. If you've got quality assurance engineers looking at stuff, you can give them a list of things that you can look for. You know, I've got this theory that injection flaws will never get past a QA team that knows what to look for, right? You don't need to be a security expert to find a lot of this stuff. And there can also be internal security-specific testing from your AppSec folks as well, so that's useful. And then there's the external stuff, right? Pen tests. Really, really blunt tool for actually verifying how well you've done your job. They have their place mostly in sort of sales enablement, or things like bug bounty programs as well. They're a good thing, but it's good to know what options you've got there for verifying your efforts and working out how effective those various things are. I seem to have sort of run out of time, and that's kind of all I wanted to talk about anyway. But to finish off, I just want to sort of spend a few more moments thinking about where I started, which is that there's a lot of people stuff involved in doing application security work. You know, it's a technical discipline, obviously, but also it isn't. Your success is more likely to be down to how well you do the non-technical things than it is how well you do the technical things. Empathy and leadership skills are an important part of that. Yeah, so that's all I had to say. Thank you for your attention.
I love the fact you've got the breadboard today when you didn't have it yesterday.
Yeah,
nice.
Well, I did actually have a breadboard yesterday, I just didn't use it.
Fair enough. Any questions for Mark?
Please start down that end of the room. Just like watching you run.
That's disturbing.
I want to hear the other talk as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're bypassing CFP for next year. We're having that.
Questions? Oh.
Hi, Mark. In terms of a career in AppSec, do you think a development background is essential, desirable? Is AppSec an entry-level job in cybersecurity? Or do you think people need to have a certain technical background before doing it?
I don't think experience as a developer is essential. I think that it's much easier to go from a role in development to AppSec than it is to get into any security field any other way. So current developers are a really, really good talent pool for potential AppSec people. I think it's useful to understand software development, how it works. I think it's useful to understand the basics of the technologies that an organization you're working with uses. I don't think you need to be a particularly brilliant programmer. Interesting aside on this, actually, I discovered when I went to Mozilla and spent some time going back to actually building stuff there, that my experience of working in security made me a much different programmer and not necessarily a better one. And I think what I learned from that is that, you know, maybe it's just the way my mind worked, but I was constantly agonizing about security stuff when I was trying to work on a ticket, and it made me a lot slower. And I think that perhaps tells us a little bit about how AppSec and dev can work together. I think if you foster this environment where you're approachable and helpful, then you can free up developers to do their thing well and quickly, and know that they'll come and talk to you when there's something that looks interesting. I don't know if that helps at all.
Any more questions for Mark? Conway, come on.
No, my views.
This is a fun game. I am sorry. I'm so sorry. Well, a little bit sorry.
We were having fun watching you run back and forth. So what is the best way that you have retained your sanity through your journey?
There's an implication there, he has.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, did I?
Well, he did get dressed today by himself. So.
You presume. I did get dressed myself today, to clarify. It's kind of fun. I've got a theory about AppSec. If you draw a chart where on one axis you've got the amount of hassle you have to endure, on the other you've got the rewards. The curve isn't a flat one, and so it means that there's a maxima you can find. And my personal opinion is that having done dev stuff, having done security stuff, probably what I'm doing at the moment is the optimum for me at the moment. So I do actually genuinely really enjoy it. I find surprising things draining. I spend a lot of time in meetings. Meetings are a lot harder for me now than they used to be because I'm spending so much time on Zoom. So disconnecting, doing a lot of stuff that doesn't involve computers. Chickens are great. I like to work a lot with my hands, mending stuff, making stuff, hobbies and things like that. So my antidote to the stresses of work is lots of not work.
That's an excellent point.
Yes, I approve of that message, 100%.
Yeah, but your hobby's drinking.
It's still not work. Oh, maybe it is work.
Sometimes. Any more questions for more? Oh,
that's all right. You stay there, mate. Save your legs.
If you find an issue and you pass it back to the devs to look at and fix, do they appreciate that, or are they annoyed that you found stuff and just want to ship it out as fast as I can?
I think it is entirely defined by how you build a relationship with that dev. I think if the only interaction you have with them is to give them bad news, first of all, they're not going to be delighted to talk to you in the first place. Granted, there's probably still a bit of a pause for breath when I say hi to someone. But if most of the conversations I have with a dev is on how to do something rather than what's wrong, then the what's wrong conversation is going to be a very different one. I've never found a dev that isn't interested in fixing a problem. Sometimes they won't understand, but I think folks generally aren't resistant if they understand what's going on.
Cool, one more question. How are we for time, actually? We're nearly there. Oh, last one.
Talk to us about supply chains, because obviously the thing is that you've got some control over your staff and your code base and all that. The majority of organizations have zero control over the stuff that they use. So you're in a very privileged position to be able to talk to the dev. How do we talk to 3 devs away or however many to get that same message across so that the stuff we use that's old and out of date or needs to be repaired in one way or another can actually get looked at, fixed and sorted?
Excellent question, actually. It's not easy. Yes, you can influence the stuff that your organization maintains itself. But no one is only using their own stuff. There's always libraries, even if it's the platform standard library, right? And therefore, there will always be upstream problems. I think there are 2 interesting things here. One is the question around open source. I'm a massive fan of open source. I think most of the problems that we have in using it are down to the fact that we want to be able to use it and not help with the cost of maintaining it. I think that there are efforts underway to improve that situation, but it's going to take a while, right? So I think that a good starting thought on that one is to factor in the cost of ensuring that you have enough maintenance of that thing when you make the decision to use it. And it was more common at Mozilla than it was at other places that I've worked in, but it's not entirely unexpected for open source projects to get sort of random commits from contributors for security reasons, right? So that's one interesting thing. Another one is that the nature of the way that we aggregate stuff on the web really changes software supply chain. When you load a website, you've also got a whole load of third-party analytics and services and things that you're using. And I think a lot of people haven't fully internalized the fact that anything that you're allowing to execute in your page has the full privileges that the user has, right? And so that's an interesting thing. That's harder because very often security isn't front of mind for any of the people producing those tools. And there's obviously a lot less transparency around the way they're developed or even what's in there than there is for a lot of the open source stuff. Does that answer your question? Is there another aspect I missed?
That's a question, I think, for the break, because we're going to get into... It's tea and coffee time, Stuart.
Yep.
And I love your questions. I just think the two of you should sit down and stare at each other over a cup of Yorkshire tea.
Nice.
Not Nescafe. Why did Ben buy Nescafe?
Coffee's dummy. Okay, everybody, a round of applause for Mark.